So I'm very excited. So a big hand, please, for Gary Heseltine.
In this room, there's probably 150, 200 people. Stick your hands up in the air if you've ever been to Rendlesham Forest. So, 1, 2, 3, maybe about 10. Out of 200, not many. How many have never heard of the Rendlesham Forest incident? Stick your hand up in the air. Right, please leave the room now. You should. Right, okay. Oh, no, but this is good feedback for me because it knows where to pitch things. Because sometimes you get audiences who've all been there and they know the case intimately. But I would say on this, there's quite a few people never been. Or the majority, 90% have never been. And a lot of people in the room who do not know the Rendlesham Forest case. Right. Suffice to say, okay, based on that then, here's a quick rundown, a 1-minute rundown of the Rendlesham Forest incident. In the history of the subject of UFOs worldwide, it's now ranked arguably up there with Roswell in July 1947. Now, if you think of all the millions of cases around the world, that means it must be pretty valued for a reason. And the reason why it's principally up there is because we're talking about multiple military US Air Force police witnesses to a series, and I mean series, I don't mean 1, 2 or 3, of perhaps 15 to 20 events, UFO-related events, that take place within a 3 to 4 day period just after Christmas in 1980 in a place called Rendlesham Forest, which is a forest between 2 American bases, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge, in the middle, Rendlesham Forest. So the events that I'm talking about, these 15 to 20 incidents, happen all at or near the bases. Some are in the forest, some are on the bases. Now, the general way this case has been presented is actually quite interesting. It's a case that was never meant to be publicised. It was never meant to be released. It was released accidentally, and I'll talk about that in my PowerPoint presentation. Essentially, what you have is, whilst there are some civilian witnesses on the periphery, this is essentially a military US Air Force security specialist who were guarding nuclear weapons, principally. There were security police. I was in the Royal Air Force Police guarding nuclear weapons. They were doing exactly the same, guarding tactical nuclear weapons at RAF Bentwaters. Okay? Now, for those people who have some knowledge, over the years you will be familiar with 4 names, 3 of which are very familiar, which is Colonel Charles Holt, retired, who was at the time Lieutenant Colonel, the Deputy Base Commander. You'll heard of, in virtually every documentary ever made, him, Airman John Burroughs, and also Sergeant Jim Penniston. And you know of Penniston and Burroughs because of their first night encounter with a small triangular object about 3 meters by 3 meters in the forest. So that's pretty weird, isn't it? That they come across a landed craft. Or certainly Jim Penniston says that. John Burroughs, who was with him, who was maybe 20 to 30 meters behind him, does not say he saw a structured triangular craft. He saw a bank of lights. But that doesn't mean either of them are lying. It just means that perceptions in extraordinary circumstances will be different. And if he's 30 meters back, his view of the object, subject to the glare of the object, etc., may be different. So all he does see is lights, whereas Jim Penniston says he saw a black, opaque black triangular craft, 3 meters by 3 meters, about 2 meters high, with a dome effect at the top, and basically had some lights inside that were just pulsing occasionally. But under, he said when he touched the craft, he felt like glass, warm to the touch. That's the accepted story. The other person that's mentioned, who actually was the first person in the public domain for about 8 years before anybody else went forward, was a guy called Larry Warren. And initially, when the case broke in October of 1983, in the News of the World, it was a big splash. UFOs land in Suffolk, it's official. That was a major headline. And it was a major headline because they'd got hold of a piece of paper, a piece of what's called in the police documentary evidence, something that's in written form, like a statement, a bank receipt, something like that. It's something written down. Well, in this case, we're talking about what was called the Holt Memorandum. How many people in this room have never heard of the Holt Memorandum? Stick your hand up if you've never heard of it. Okay, well, that's okay, interesting. Maybe 20, 30 people. So for your benefit, what I'm going to say is the Holt Memorandum is a military document, and it was never meant to be released. In fact, Lieutenant Colonel Holt, who wrote the memorandum, hence why it's called the Holt Memorandum, tried to pull it at the last minute, but basically too many people knew about it, so therefore they said, no, we've got to release it. He knew that if that memorandum came out, it would change his life forever, and obviously it did. And he had a long, successful military career, but when he dies, he will only be known for one thing: writing the Holt Memorandum and his involvement. And what that memorandum was a one-page memo, hence memorandum, to the Ministry of Defence. And it was sent because the events that he described in the memo happened on British soil. Of course, they use American airmen, and when they're on the American base, it's a little bit of America. But technically, when they step outside, in vehicle, on foot, then they're on British soil again. And because it happened in the forest, these incidents, then basically he was told, write a memo to the Ministry of Defence and see what they want to do with it, because it happened on British soil. So he wrote this memorandum, never thinking it would ever get out in the public domain, but the memo is only 3 paragraphs. But this memorandum is now regarded as probably one of the top 5 to 10 written UFO documents in history. Why? Because on the first paragraph, it says that 2 of my airmen, Sergeant Penniston and John Burrows, came across in a small clearing in the forest a small triangular black craft, or a craft, 3 meters by 3 meters. Second paragraph is still interesting, because it then says the dimensions were X by X, and it left ground impressions, as if there were an undercarriage of some kind, creating 3 indentations into the ground. But it's the third paragraph that makes this exceptional. So first paragraph, if you think about, we're admitted, the US Air Force are saying that they came across a landed craft of unknown origin. That's pretty massive in its own, on its own. But the third paragraph for me is actually the most important one, because Holt will say in that third paragraph that on what he describes as 2 nights after the first night, when the triangular craft was seen, he then led a team of people out into Rendlesham Forest, and he set out to effectively debunk it, thinking there's nothing to this, but then found himself having several UFO encounters with strange objects himself. And so the third paragraph is what makes this really famous for me, because he's saying, I went out, led a team of people, and we saw multiple UFOs as well. So if you link it with the first paragraph, a landed craft of unknown origin, and then a deputy base commander of what was a nuclear base, RAF Bentwaters, then you have this importance. Yeah? How often do we have in history somebody of his rank, a lieutenant colonel, going on the record saying he saw UFOs himself, and then wrote about it? But he wrote about it thinking it was never going to come out. Now, before I go into my presentation, and as Andy alluded to, for the last 2 years, and it is 2 years in July, so it is for the last 2 years, I've been working on a project called Capel Green. And the subtitle is Capel Green, The Truth About the Rendlesham Forest Incidents. And essentially what you have is a number of incidents over a number of days. But if I said to you, do you believe that everything in the papers is true? put your hands up if you believe that everything in the papers is true. Okay? Everything on TV that you see is true. Everything on Wikipedia is true. Leave. So you can already see now that we're living in a world now that's more skeptical of what is real fact and what isn't. However, with the rise of social media, YouTube, we end up with lots of dodgy CGI, especially in the UFO field. 98% is CGI. If it looks too good, it's CGI. Okay, that's the bottom rule. But also what it does do, for those people who kind of study social media, is we know that social media is addictive, the likes of Facebook, etc., but it's also a way to control the masses. And it is dumbing down the audience. You'll become less critical, you'll follow patterns, you'll watch whatever you watch on YouTube, you think that's true. With that, there are inherent dangers. Now, for the last 2 years, I've been working on a documentary to try to reveal, for the first time, everything that you should have been told by television companies worldwide for the last 37 years, since it went public in October of 1983. Does that make sense? We're nearly at the 40th anniversary, and believe me, you only know 30% of the real events. Now, there's either two ways that happens. Either TV companies have got an agenda not to tell you the truth, or we're all crazy and we're totally wrong. Now, I take the view that it's the TV companies who've got agendas, who do not want you to know everything about various things, not just UFOs. But in the Rendlesham Forest case, particularly, this is relevant. And the reason why it's relevant is because for 7 years I had a collaboration period with Colonel Holt, the guy who wrote the memorandum. That ended in late 2014, and I ended it, and I will talk about that in my presentation. In 2017, I was then approached by a documentary filmmaker called Dion Johnson. And he basically said, I ran into Larry Warren, who was the original military whistleblower, whilst at Rendlesham Forest. And if, for those of you that don't know, there is a natural trail. You can take your dog there, you can go on a bike ride around the Rendlesham Trail, and there's signs up and whatever. And he just ran into him, and he kind of knew of him. And he said, I'd like to make a documentary. And so Larry went, okay. Who do I need to speak to? And he said, well, this guy knows the story better than anybody. So he gave him my number. And so Dion Johnson rang me, the director, and said, I want to make a documentary. And originally I thought that he was trying to get funding. That's usually how somebody has an idea, and then they'll go to a network and say, will you give us funding from the History Channel to make this documentary, yay or nay? So when he rings me, he told me what had happened, and I said, okay, well, there's been a lot of controversy about Larry Warren of late. He's always said he'd be happy to do a polygraph test for years. From my point of view, why I suggest that before you do anything, you get him to see if he can do a polygraph. And if he passes the polygraph, I'll get involved. If he fails, I won't. Can't be any simpler than that. So he went away. I didn't know anything about polygraph, even though I'd been in the police. It isn't used by the British police. It's used more in the criminal, in private, if you think of marriage settlements, breakdowns, things like that, it's often used, but not by the police courts in England and Wales. It's used widely in America, and it's widely known and accepted. Now, he came back to me about 2 weeks later, and he said, okay, got it all set up. I've got the top polygraph examiner in Britain, willing to do it for free. She's just fascinated by the subject. It's a bit different. Do you want to come down and get involved? So I went down, got involved, and what I'm going to say is I wasn't there when the polygraph test on Larry Warren was done. Nobody was. However, we did set up remote cameras from 5 different angles around the room because we wanted to capture it, and we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know whether he'd pass or fail or anything. But without going into too much detail, I'm going to say he passed, and he passed well. And all that was captured, but only later on. We didn't know that at the time. So Capel Green, that was the premise. And I'm thinking, no, you're going to get your funding now. Because it's a positive, you know, you get funding. He says, no, this is going to be an independent. And I'd like you to be the writer. Okay, so what do you mean by independent? He says, well, we can say anything we want. And having worked on maybe 7 or 8 Rendlesham documentaries over the year, with mainstream TV, Sky, Channel 4, Channel 5, etc., I've realised for a long time that they make entertainment. They don't make necessarily the truth. They don't lie overtly, they just don't tell you all the information. It's done very subtly. It's done by omission. All right, so basically when he said it's independent, I'm thinking, okay, that means we really can say anything we want. Now, for me as a writer, that was really exciting because I knew that the way that the TV treated this subject and the media agenda, the financial agenda that they have. So by becoming independent, it meant that I could go away, research, and then present whatever came out to the public. So that is my remit with this documentary, which is 2 years in the making, and it's probably going to be towards Christmas when it finally comes out, because we're still getting new, vital stuff from big witnesses, and you'll see why we hung on for a little bit if all comes off. If you get a really important military witness willing to speak unexpectedly, then it's worth hanging and including that in. Okay, so when it comes out, it will be, my promise to you is to give you all the facts that I can cram into 2 hours and 2 hours 15 from over 56 hours of material that we've recorded with interviews with over 45 people worldwide. Okay, now that's a hard enough logistics job, and it is, but that's what we're working on, and when it comes out, there will be so many new and old revelations that have been, for whatever reason, conveniently sidelined by the TV companies. And I look at that and think that is criminal that they have not told you, the public, and as a former detective for 19 years, I think I know what is relevant and what is evidential, and there are so many things that you should have been told by TV companies, and they haven't done it. So the questions will be for them, I think, after the documentary. So that sets us up as to why we're having a 5-minute trailer of what this film will look like. So if we put the lights out, he said, hopefully this will play with the sound.
We came to the edge of this field, Capel Green, and in the field, the first thing I saw was one of our airmen upset. Robert Ball was talking to him. The guy was scared about something. And then walked forward into this field. What I could see was a 50-foot diameter, approximately, glowing mist on the ground. I saw a red light come in, came down over the field in a downward arc, and went to the top of this mist, and I was not far from it, and there was a flash of light that was blinding. All of this is being filmed, and in the place was a triangular, delta-shaped machine, object, craft.
The red, orange, glowing ball object was about approximately 2 feet off the ground. I cocked and locked the M60 machine gun. I was scared to death. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know if it was going to hurt me. Yeah, the airman jumped the fence and went out towards it, and if it had done anything to try to harm him, I was fully prepared to open fire on him.
When it broke into 3 pieces, the whole thing just blew us away. I mean, there's no aircraft that could do that. The movements, no aircraft can even do that today.
It was like a thick beam that was scanning the whole WSA, like he was looking for something.
Well, I watched cameras go through the actions of filming, and I know still pictures were taken. And off the fabric of this machine thing came this bluish gold bubble that was about 1 foot off the ground, and it split into 3. And inside that, the upper extremities of what I only can say was a non-human entity. We have actual motion picture film of the UFO. And it was given to the F-15 that flew from Germany onto Bentwaters Airfield, and it was handed to the pilot, canopy closed, and the plane took off.
This craft, or whatever it was, it kind of started back, like it was backing out of the WSA, and it started going over the treetops of the forest.
What told me this was alive is that when they moved,
Thank you. Okay, so that's the trailer, and I just wanted to give you kind of an insight into what's going on. But the reality is that there is so much information, just put it on there, that I can't tell you until the film's out. But I'm still going to tell you stuff. So what we're going to do now is go into a PowerPoint presentation. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that I can talk about or I'm prepared to talk about. But suffice to say that when you get to see this documentary, if you're interested, between 60 and 70% of the material you will hear will be new to this subject. And I will be honest and to say is that up until 2017, I thought I knew the Rendlesham case. However, when I was approached by the director and when I realised that it was going to be independent, I thought, well, I can tell anything then, any fact that I come across that I deem of interest that I think should be in the public domain. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I best go back and make sure my study is right. I don't want to misquote. So I actually made a decision to go back to the first day after the incident. i.e. we're talking January of 1981. So the incidents are believed to happen somewhere between Christmas Eve or Christmas night, early hours into Boxing Day. That's regarded as the first night. There's some conjecture over whether there's 3 consecutive nights or 4 consecutive nights of activity. That will be revealed in the film, okay? But I would lean to the latter, and all will become clear as to why that is in the film. Okay, so my starting point for reinvestigation is literally as soon as it's finished, when do we first begin to hear anything about it? And during that process, which probably took about 18 months, I came across a wealth of the material that I didn't know of. And I was, what I thought was one of the leading researchers. But so much old material had been out there in the public domain, written in old UFO magazines, old American magazines, MUFON documents, International UFO Reporter, all these obscure publications. But they've all been out there. Many people have researched Rendlesham over the years, way before I ever got involved. And some of them had done a fantastic work that should have been recognised, in my opinion, but for some strange reason have never appeared on camera. And we're talking since 1983, when the case broke, we have never had, we've had something like 50 to 60 worldwide documentaries made on Rendlesham. And yet here we are, all these years later, and most people still think it's about Penniston Burroughs, Larry Warren to a lesser extent, and Colonel Holt. That is completely wrong. And a lot of the new information is coming out because over the years it's become very political. And there is a very big political faction, and I don't mean trolling, I mean politics. There are deliberate plays at work by the US Air Force, the US government, the British Ministry of Defence, and the British government. They don't want you to know the full facts about Rendlesham Forest. And the evidence is clearly supporting the fact that you are not being shown the best evidence. Now, as a former police officer, when you go into court, the test of evidence is it's got to be the best evidence rule. And yet, when it comes to TV, documentary people, they have their own rules. In fact, let me just give you as a side example before I go into my PowerPoint, is the fact that I think it was 2015, 2016, I did a documentary with Channel 4 and Channel 5. And both said to me, oh, we're really keen to tell the whole story. And I said, okay then, I'm going to give you a world exclusive. Do you want it? And they went, oh, yeah. Give us it, Gary, give us it, Gary. So I said, I'll tell you exactly where the beam of light from a UFO 1,000 feet above Colonel Holt's group came down. I can show you exactly where that was. And I know that because I walked around with Colonel Holt in 2010 and he said it happened here. It's never been on camera. And what identifications are in the public domain now are wrong. Okay, so I know where this is. Excuse me, it's world exclusive. Do you want it? Yes, we want it. I said, okay, I'll give you it, but I'm going to make a bet with you. You will not include it in the final edit of the programme for TV. And I went, no, don't be daft. Was it in the programme when it aired? No, not in Channel 4, not in Channel 5. Now, a world exclusive, you think if they really want to tell the truth, they're going to include that. It's going to be like a world exclusive. Wow, we've got this new revelation. Did they show it? No. Why? Because if they did, they couldn't tell you about flying lighthouses. Think about it. People still, after all these years, still talk about a lighthouse was responsible for confusing all these airmen as they rode around in the forest, and they got very scared by this lighthouse that was casting a beam. That's what they want you to still talk about. That's the reality. So 55 to 60 documentaries still talk about Lighthouse. Whereas if they showed a UFO stopping above Holt's team of 5 and shining a laser beam down to the ground, literally where your feet are to me, about 12 inches wide for about 20 seconds, how could that be a lighthouse? Couldn't, could it? So if they include that, they can't then say it's a lighthouse, can they? Do you see what I mean? So we can't use that. We can't talk about lighthouses then. And that shows to me that they have an agenda to make entertainment, but not necessarily to tell the truth. Does that make sense? Yeah. TV has funding. So if you go to the History Channel, I've worked with the History Channel, they get funding, right, we're going to make a programme about this. They put in a dream sheet of what the programme will look like and what it's going to end like. What it will reveal, and it's a one-page document, and it will say at the end of the documentary, that's what will come out. It's already an agenda. Yeah? So remember, TV makes entertainment, not necessarily the truth. Okay, so Capel Green documentary. Switch me. I've talked so much, my remote's gone off. Not like me. All right, so here we go then. So, now, why is it called Capel Green? Well, if you look on an Ordnance Survey map, see that field there in white? It says Capel Green. Now, actually, we've had a lady saying, well, actually, it's not Capel Green, it's there, this side. But on a lot of maps, it's over where we say it's Capel Green. And that's because Larry Warren named it Capel Green because that's what he saw on maps when he looked it up. Okay? So, Capel Green, if we think about it there, that field there is arguably the most famous field in Britain. Or it should be, after this documentary. Because gone will be the flying lighthouses. Then we're looking at 15 to 20 UFO experiences. And by UFO I mean ET, some non-human intelligence. In all the documentaries that I've worked on, they use some special effects, and it's always artistic license. Go draw this, go draw that. It's never depicted as per the witness's description. So we've been careful in this documentary to say, if it's a ball of light that's like a beach ball, that it's got a slit in there and it's glowing, that's how it's going to be shown. Because we want you to see what it's like for the first time. And we're not talking 3 incidents, we're talking 15 to 20. And I'm saying 15 to 20 because I know a lot more than you do, and I can't tell you about the ones that you want to know about. Yeah? So you're thinking, no, 15 to 20 is crazy. No. Incidents. And what we mean in policing terms, if, for example, I was to stab this gentleman now in front of the audience, which wouldn't be a good idea, but if I did, and you'd all become witnesses, and then I ran out through there, this young lady who was a fit marathon runner, not probably, she would run out thinking, I'm going to get that bad guy because he's just killed this man in a t-shirt. And she would chase after me. If you were a police officer chasing, as soon as that break of continuity goes, i.e. I go around a corner and I'm lost to that chasing person, that's the end of an incident. Yeah? Because you've lost contact. You don't know where they are. 5 minutes later, you then might see them again. It then begins again. But that's classed as a different incident. So when we look at the Rendlesham Forest incident, we have a collection of part incidents and then a couple of ongoing incidents. Yeah? But when you break it down, you can break it down into many different incidents. And what you can find is one person over there has a sighting, and then 2 minutes further up the road, totally different, another sighting's taking place. Totally unrelated. They're different events, although you could argue they're part of an ongoing event. All right? So, let's move on. So, that's basically what happens on one of the nights. The most disputed night. Now, if I said to you the British government do not want this to be real, that event in that field to be real, let's think about this. Would the British government, Ministry of Defence, US Air Force, US government want to admit that the base commander of a nuclear base went into an open farmer's field on British soil and spoke or had a silent face-off with 3 non-human entities in a field with loads of security policemen all around watching, and it was being filmed on video camera and cinefilm, and also a couple of British bobbies in the background as well. Would they want that, if it were real, would they want that coming out as fact? No, because UFOs can't be real. We've had a stigma for 70 years. We can't have this hard reality. And yet they're in a bit of a quandary, you see, Because when the Holt Memorandum came out, that escaped. That came out through Freedom of Information Act in America. It shouldn't have come out. It did. And Colonel Williams, who was the base commander at the time, he actually was interviewed briefly for a documentary. And he said, once the memorandum came out, it lived its own life. We couldn't do anything about it. It was in the public domain. And that's exactly right. They couldn't get out of the fact that there was a military piece of paper written by a deputy base commander of a nuclear facility that said he saw multiple UFOs and a landed craft was on the first night. They had to live with that. It had escaped. It shouldn't have got out, but it got escaped. But what could they control? Everything else. And they've managed over the years to kind of use various techniques to cast aspersions on various people to say, oh no, this is all rubbish. But if that scenario was true, that's probably the biggest secret of Rendlesham Forest. And let me tell you, when I began my re-investigation, my primary aim was to see if there was any evidence to find that that happened in a field. Put your hands up if you think I had more than 2 confirmations. Put your hands up if you thought I had more than 5 confirmations. Put your hands up if you found more than 10 confirmations. Put your hands up if I found more than 15 confirmations. Now you're talking. Now you are talking. 15 plus confirmations that that event in that field happened. And that's me as a detective saying, these are confirmations that I would accept that show something happened in that field. Some are quite tenuous, but they're all definite. If somebody starts talking about aliens, who's the first person? Anybody in the audience? Who can tell me the first time aliens was mentioned, entities was mentioned historically in Rendlesham Forest? Who mentioned it first? Put your hands up. Wrong. Next. Any more? I've put this question to UFO researchers and they don't know, a lot of them. So that tells you in itself. Within 2 days, a pseudonym called Steve Roberts, his real name J.D. Ingalls, military guy, had told Brenda Butler, who was one of the early civilian researchers, that there'd been an incident in a field with non-human entities, a landed craft, security police around, and it was all filmed. Within 2 days, nothing to do with Larry Warren. So when you start getting independent stories like that, where did that come from? Bear in mind the case never emerged until October of 1983. In the public domain, it was known through UFO communities. It was known, it had been researched by certain researchers. The earliest civilian researchers were Brenda Butler and Dot Street, then soon joined by Jenny Randalls. Did great early research, local stories, farmers' stories. They got independent reports of aliens in the field, all of which will be revealed in the film. We've talked about this, but this is interesting. That 7-year collaboration period was very good. We had a really good report. It was generally always by email because he lived in America and I lived in the UK. But here's something from the very first night I met him. We were filming for the UFO Hunters TV series, which is History Channel, and it ran for 3 series. Blair, who was the guy, Bill Burns' program. Okay? Now, this was written by me in this book on the first night, and that's the first night I met Holt, in the lobby of the hotel in Ipswich. And I put there, I want you to remember, now, he didn't know me from Adam. He knew I was going to be there, but he didn't know me. But for me, he was like really excited. It was like me, if you like football, it's like meeting Pele. It was great, and I threw all these questions at him. We got on great. And of course, when I went back to my room, my head was buzzing. So I think I want to try to remember as much of what he told me, or the pertinent things. And what he basically said was, he was told too many people knew it existed. He tried to pull the memorandum. We talked about that. He knew that if released, the media would be on his back, which they have ever since. claims that the tape was left in the drawer. Now, this is an audio tape for those of you who are unfamiliar with the case. When Holt was out there with his team of men, he had carried a little dictaphone that he used to take around for making notes, a razor letter for Colonel Smith. Now, he took it out on the night when he was in the forest, so he made intermittent, although that's alleged, he made various comments into his dictaphone during the live UFO events as he went around the forest and saw UFOs. He described them on his dictaphone. So that's the audio tape that we're talking about. He told me there were more US nuclear ordnance in the weapons storage area, that's the nuclear weapons storage area at Bentwaters, than in any other site in the entire UK. He could never admit to there being nuclear weapons there because the British government were not supposed to have US nuclear weapons at Bentwaters. Is that a reason why we don't talk about what happened in the field? Might be, mightn't it? Bit of a motive there. Yeah, well, we don't want that getting out. Breaks the armament agreements. Ooh, that would be an international on-news night. Very good reasons why this doesn't want to come out. Okay? So, that was written the first night I met Holt. I've still got that diary. So let's move on. Now, I ended that relationship with Holt, and that's an email. And it's basically, this is in 2010 when we walked around the forest. As I said, my wife was taking various shots on her iPhone. She's not a camera woman. She just did it on her iPhone, and she did intermittent recordings and photographs. But clearly he was there. He knew that she was taking photographs. He's looking at her there. Right? But I ended that. This has never been shown before, by the way. I ended my association because he started attacking the original military whistleblower, Larry Warren, saying he got a lot of dirt on him, but he wouldn't produce the evidence. And I said, well, you can't say somebody's a con man or a fraud until you've got the evidence. Otherwise, you're basically just libeling people, slandering people. But he did it anyway. So when he did it the second time, I ended my association because he was being unprofessional. If he had the evidence and he could have put it out there, and it would stand up to scrutiny, then fine. The evidence falls where it falls. But he didn't, so it was an idle threat. He had a big downer on him. Now, in the film, you'll find out maybe a couple of reasons why he had a big downer on him. But I can't tell you that now. But he's got a big downer on him. All right? This is very interesting. This is a shot that you never get to see in any 55 documentaries. And if you were an investigative journalist, a director of a TV programme, wouldn't you think, well, this happened in a relatively small area, let's get a good, decent map for my audience to make it entertaining. Nobody's ever taken that shot. Ask yourself why in 37 years. Because it's a very interesting shot, because this is the farmer's field, this is the farmhouse that is opposite what's called the farmer's field. There's a finger of trees here that sticks out, and then there's more wheat that goes around the back. More of the field goes around the back. But it's very interesting because when we talk about various reports of landing sites, okay, let's look at them. Over the years, landing sites. According to Brenda and Dot, the early civilian researchers, Colonel Holt took them personally to where, this is, if you've ever been there, there's a sculpture there now. It's not quite in the same position, but there used to be 3 trees there, for anybody who'd been there before. These don't exist anymore, but this was supposedly a marker where the landing site was, the first night landing site. Now, Holt is supposed to have taken Dot and Brenda there and said it's there. So that's in this corner of the field there. If you think that's the edge of the forest, it's about there. So Holt has taken them that, so it's a legitimate supposed landing site. I went there with him and he said, no, I took Brenda in there, but it's not there at all. It's way over there. So, is there a game going on there, Colonel? Sounds like it. So anyway, the next landing site that we're aware of is actually where Holt took me. And he also took Bill Burns' team for the UFO Hunters program. And basically, there is a marker tree, there's a single oak tree, and then there's a double oak tree that are really old, original trees, not ones that were knocked down in the Great Storm of '87. The hurricane of '87. And basically, in this area behind here, 75 metres in this kind of area of the forest, is the supposedly Penniston and Burroughs landing site. Now, for Invasion USA Rendlesham Forest, which is a documentary, I think, 2001, A big production, Holt and Burroughs tried to identify the field and couldn't find it. But for 2007, for the UFO Hunters program, Holt took me there and just said it's in this general area. The forest is not the same. It was all wiped clean by the hurricane in '87. It destroyed 90% of the forest. So all the trees now that you ever see are not original, apart from a few that are way bigger, and you can tell that they're much bigger and taller, that they're the ones that survive. But literally only 10% survive. So of course, we've got question marks about this landing site, because Holt took them to the wrong site. We've got this one that doesn't bear up with the UFO invasion program. So is that right or wrong, involving Colonel Holt? And there's one more that's well known in the public domain, which is this one. And Larry Warren has said in approximately between halfway between there and halfway between there, just there, that incident in the field, with the airmen stood around and a landing craft and the non-entities were seen, happened there. And that is, by far, the only consistent historical landing site that has never changed. And yet this is the most disputed one. Interesting? Okay, so let's now look at the map again. Now, there are certain marker trees that people aren't aware of. When I had my 7-year association with Holt and I walked around with him and said, rerun your audio tape, plot your movements, retread your steps, that tree there, opposite the farmhouse, is where Holt saw a UFO for the first time. It was to the left of the farmhouse, glowing about the size of a car, and it was so glowing that it reflected into the farmhouse windows and made it look like the farmhouse was on fire. That's the first time he saw it in the clear, having followed it in the forest. And his marker tree, to remember where he was, is that tree there. And it's literally opposite the farmhouse. Now, not many people realise that Larry Warren, when he got involved, a couple of nights later, if it's the same, right? We're still looking at that. But this is a double oak tree at the edge, and it's just there. And that's where he said he entered the field for the first time, looked back, saw this tree glowing. It had a finger pointing out, a branch, so he remembered it. That's good. That's actually good policing. You look for a marker so you can retrace your steps. Where was it? And so not many people realise that there are two different marker trees, single one and a double one. And Larry Warren said he stepped into the field, he looked back, and there's this tree glowing, and there's the strange mist that then transformed into a craft, and then entities came out. Okay, so that's interesting. Not many people see that. And guess what? This is my photograph in 2010 of Colonel Holt pointing to the exact field that was a world exclusive that's never been shown on TV because they still want to talk about lighthouses. Strange. So it's not this field, it's that field. Never been shown in any documentary. Why? If you're an investigative documentary maker, you should be showing the evidence, shouldn't you? So, and one other thing, people talk about the lighthouse. The lighthouse, if you look there, that is the sea. That is the North Sea, and the lighthouse is going to be way over here. Okay? But how can a lighthouse stop above your feet if you put a beam down? It can't, ridiculous. And these individual incidents are so strange. We also include 3 precursor cases in the documentary. What I mean by precursor, they're 3 cases where events took place in February 1980, UFO events, in July of 1980, and then November 1980. All involving similar objects, strange multiple objects in the sky, near the forest, on the base, all leading up to this mass event at late December. Okay, I've already explained. This is the director, Dion Johnson, who approached me. This is the actor playing Larry Warren. This is Larry Warren as he is now, 58 years old. Okay, so we've already explained that. That's the setup just before the test took place. And I guarantee you, whatever your thoughts are on Larry Warren, when you see this documentary, half the audience will be in tears, like I was when I saw it the first time. Lots of people have seen this footage within the documentary making team. Very emotional. And you'll see why. They'll all be explained in the film. This is online filming. This is our first shoot 2 years ago, about August of 17. We're using 4K drone footage. That's a £5,000 drone, and it's done by a guy who does industrial filming for landscapes, a guy called Graham Taplin, who does fantastic work. Never had an interest in UFOs, but he's now fascinated by this. But we wanted to bring the forest to life in a way that it's never been shown to you. Because you should have the maps, you should have the visual look of it. You do it on any other kind of subject, but not with this. Why are we not being shown where these events have happened? We're going to show all that. This is that's that double marker tree. This is what's called the staging area. Now, the staging area takes place on every night of the event. It's important. It's never been shown on camera properly, explained. Lots of vehicles end up being there. Lots of military people. There's chaos. There's panic going on. It's never been explained. We will explain that. Okay, he started off as a small project, grew and grew. Now, I used to be friendly with Nick and Bob. We'd have dinner together, never had a problem, never had a wrong word. As soon as I said I'm making Capel Green, he then starts to say, I should be arrested for perpetrating a hoax on the UFO community. Never had a wrong word in the past. He actually calls for my arrest for fraud. Why would you do that? But who's been closely aligned with the official story for many, many years? Nick Pope. And if you think about Nick Pope, he was closely aligned with Georgina Bruni. You can't tell the people. Did the pre-publicity. Did his own books. Worked then with John Burroughs, Jim Pennister. Refused to take part in the documentary. So why is he suddenly going from Mr. Nice Guy to me, never had a wrong word, now saying I should be arrested? What would be the point of me putting my entire reputation, if I've got one, on the line? And I've been out in the public domain for 17 years with the police database that I launched in 2002. Why would I do that? Am I going to really set myself up for a massive fall? I might as well just go, way, give me a gun. So this says to me that there's maybe a bit of politics going on here. And there's a politics that I said right from the off. There are sides that are way important that we can't talk about them. We have to talk about them in certain degrees because they are linked to governments and linked to how the case is shown. All right? So they are relevant. That's just a very young photograph. Let's go on. Yes, I've got 5 minutes. All right? 10 American interviews that we did. These are the ones that we've shown you on camera so far. They'll be in the film. You obviously don't know who they are, but I do. Steve Longero, who featured, who said about the beams in the weapons storage area, they met at my conference. I flew him over for the conference, and we had him on stage, and he confirmed that nuclear weapons, UFO, shining a beam, he was inside with his gun, on ground, on foot, inside the nuclear weapons storage area. When a UFO was seen, shone a beam down into the nuclear bunkers, starts doing a grid search. An intelligent act. This is not random. This appears to be an intelligent act scanning the weapons storage area. Now we've got a name. We've always had rumours. It's been in Houses of Parliament based on rumours. So this should go high up when the film comes out. We will be trying to get it back to the House of Commons again. But this time we've got a witness who will say, I was there. It's a big difference. Okay, over the years, the last 2 years, we've spoken to many other people. The most famous living abductee is Travis Walton. We caught up with him at the Awakenings conference last year, and he talked to Larry Warren over many years. They'd run into each other, and he says, this guy exhibits exactly the same characteristics of somebody who's really seen something. You can't get post-trauma from borrowing somebody's story, as somebody would like you to say. Post-trauma comes from an event that causes trauma, hence why it's post-trauma. You can't invent it. Your body reacts in a certain way. Okay? Michael Stacey Smith, he was prepared, locked and loaded with his M60. This is one of the precursor cases. During a recent shoot, Dion and a film extra in the forest, 2 in the morning, they have a UFO experience. Blue ball of light shoots across the field towards them, scares them half silly. I got home at 3:30 from that shoot. Phone's going just outside my house. We've had a fucking... I'm never fucking going back there again. These kind of weird things have happened. Battery failures we've had all. So things are still going on. And we've learnt a lot of new information, new witnesses coming forward who are living in that area, who have just emerged, but very credible, very interesting stories. This is how the memo that I referred to, that's it there. The things people say. Now, I'm good that this is things that you would like to read, but I'm only going to show you it quick because it's for the film. So unless you saw it and could read it quick, it's for the film. 6 valuable documents there. More valuable stuff. This is an interesting guy, Adrian Bustinza, a key witness to the event in the field. I wonder what he has to say. I did a big file on him, 40 pages plus. Interesting what he has to say. People who put Larry Warren in the forest, this is this incident in the field. Adrian Bustinza put him in there. Greg Battram put him in there. And Steve Longero, the guy who was in the beam, who was in that film, he put him in there on that night. On that night. But there's a lot more to the story than that. A lot more. Rarely seen people who never get really mentioned. This guy, and I might finish on this because I've got about 2 minutes. This guy is General Gabriel. Okay? In fact, let's tell you who they are. Master Sergeant Ball, Bobby Ball. He has been interviewed on camera a couple of times, but never spoken or interviewed properly. Never had an investigative statement taken from him. This is Edgar Banzak, who was with Pennison and Holt on Pennison and Burroughs on the first night. That's the original source to Brenda. He would have been the original military whistleblower, but he chose a pseudonym and then retracted his story 7 years later. Okay, that's Steve Roberts' pseudonym. Major Zickler, General Basley, who the audio tape was played to when it was originally shown. Colonel Ted Conrad, squadron leader who for the MOD, who it was sent to, and this is Lieutenant Bruce England. But this guy is the most interesting one. And I'll finish on this. Okay? It's Christmas. I was in the RAF for 6 years. I was in the police for 24 years. At Christmas, in the military, if you're an officer, it's, hey, ho, let's go to the party time. There will be a few people on, but the officer's life to an airman's life is completely different. If anybody's been in the military in this audience, put your hand up. Okay, so Army, Air Force, Navy, have we got some of those? Where the officers have tended to have an easier life than the non-commissioned. All right, so I'm not telling a lie there, are they? It's a different world if you're an officer. Well, fair enough, but that's the way it is. Now, this event happens between Christmas and New Year. This guy is the head of the 8th Air Force in the whole of Europe. Over Christmas? Just happens to call in at the base? Do you think that's feasible? On ordinary, I'll just call in at Bentwaters. We'll just say Happy New Year. It doesn't happen. For that guy to have turned up within 3 days of the incident, something calamitous must have happened. Have I whetted your appetite? Watch Capel Green. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Oh.